My parents chose my abusive sister over me when I needed help most, so I walked away, built my life alone, and never answered again. I'm a 26-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the responsible one in my family while my sister got away with everything. From the moment we were kids, it felt like I had an invisible weight strapped to my shoulders: chores, bills, homework, help, emotional labor, you name it, it was mine. Meanwhile, my sister, Emma, floated through life like she was untouchable, her biggest crimes being temper tantrums or whining about how unfair the world was. I can still hear the echoes of her shrill voice cutting through the house. Why do I always have to do everything myself? And me scrambling to smooth over whatever mess she made, sometimes getting shoved aside or yelled at in the process. My parents, without fail, would sigh and say, "She's just sensitive. Let it go," while I was expected to absorb her fury, fix it, and never complain. It wasn't just minor things. Once, she broke my laptop in a fit of rage, and when I tried to explain the situation, my mom shook her head and said, "Be patient with her, she didn't mean it." I remember sitting in my room, staring at the cracked screen, a mix of frustration and disbelief settling deep in my chest. Even friends would occasionally comment on it: "Dude, she gets away with so much, your parents barely notice what you do." I'd just smile weakly, nod, and tell myself it was okay. That family was about loyalty, about carrying the weight quietly. Deep down, though, a small, persistent fire was growing, a knowledge that no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough, and my sacrifices weren't really noticed or valued. Every praise, every acknowledgement always seemed reserved for Emma, for her uniqueness or her charm, while my efforts were invisible unless they patched a hole she made. That imbalance, it wasn't fair, but I convinced myself it was normal. Looking back, I can see now that this pattern, this constant erasure of my struggles, was silently setting the stage for a betrayal I wasn't prepared for, a moment where the people I trusted most would make a choice that cut deeper than anything Emma had ever done. And yet, at 26, I had no idea just how close that moment already was. This all started to really hit me when I was 21 and struggling with my first serious adult crisis. I had just lost my part-time job while finishing college, and rent was overdue. I thought I could rely on my parents for guidance or even a small loan, but I quickly learned that wasn't going to happen. Instead, they focused on Emma, who had gotten herself into another mess, this time, a credit card debt she didn't tell anyone about. "We need to make sure your sister is okay first," my mom said, with that tired, dismissive tone that made me feel like a ghost in my own home. "You'll manage, you always do." I remember sitting on the couch, heart sinking, staring at the peeling wallpaper, feeling small and invisible. "Mom, Dad, what about me?" I tried, my voice shaking. My dad looked at me over his coffee mug and shrugged. "We're just prioritizing her right now. You've handled yourself fine so far." That moment felt like a punch in the gut. I had spent years carrying the emotional and financial weight of the household, always putting myself second, and suddenly it was official: my parents didn't see me as someone worthy of help when I needed it most. I went to my room, slammed the door, and sat on the floor surrounded by old textbooks and overdue bills, the cold hardwood pressing into my back. I could hear Emma laughing in the kitchen, carefree, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Friends had noticed before how unfair things were, but I always brushed it off, saying, "It's just how family is." That night, though, I realized it wasn't normal, it was toxic, and the cracks in the facade of my family's care were starting to show. The realization was heavy and disorienting, leaving me wondering how long I could keep pretending everything was fine before it all collapsed. Over the next few months, the imbalance in my family became impossible to ignore. I was juggling 2 jobs just to cover rent, utilities, and groceries, and I was barely keeping my head above water. One evening, exhausted and drained, I finally reached out to my parents for support, not financial this time, just emotional. "I feel like I'm carrying everything alone," I confessed quietly, my voice tight with frustration. My mom leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, and said, "You've always been strong. Your sister needs us more. Learn to be patient." Patience. The word hit me like a slap. I felt my stomach twist as I realized what that really meant. my struggles didn't matter, at least not compared to hers. Emma had already caused chaos that required attention, and my pain was somehow secondary. I could feel my chest tighten, and I sat there staring at the floor, listening to the ticking of the kitchen clock like it was counting down the time I'd wasted trying to be the dutiful son. Friends would later tell me I deserved better, that it wasn't fair, but at the time, I convinced myself that family loyalty meant staying quiet, enduring, and keeping the peace. Even the house seemed to weigh me down. The hum of the fridge, the creaking floorboards, the faint smell of overcooked pasta, all of it reminded me of invisible labor I had poured into this home, unnoticed and unacknowledged. I began to notice the subtle ways Emma thrived at my expense, extra allowance, praise, privileges I never got, all while I masked my resentment behind forced smiles. That night, alone in my room, I realized the emotional support I had hoped for from my parents wasn't coming. For the first time, I sensed the terrifying truth: their loyalty had limits, and I was not within them. Over the next year, the gaslighting became relentless. Emma's tantrums escalated from verbal digs to full-blown shouting matches, and sometimes she even threw objects in fits of rage. I remember one night she slammed my laptop against the wall, sparks flying from the charger, and my parents calmly said, "She's just stressed, don't take it personally." I stared at the broken device, disbelief mixing with anger and exhaustion. I tried to explain how her behavior was affecting me, how I was constantly on edge, but my words bounced off them like water on glass. "You need to be more understanding." "She can't help it," my mom said, smiling softly as if to soothe me, but really just dismissing every ounce of my frustration. I started noticing the pattern in other areas too: homework, bills, chores. I did everything right, quietly, meticulously, while she got praise for being herself, no matter the chaos she caused. Friends began noticing, asking questions. "Dude, are your parents serious? She's walking all over you." I'd laugh it off, but inside, the resentment was building, like a storm slowly gathering on the horizon. Nights became my only refuge, lying awake staring at the ceiling, feeling my parents' favoritism suffocating me, and wondering if they'd ever notice me at all. Even outside the house, the tension clung to me, invisible but heavy. The smell of Emma's perfume, the clatter of dishes she refused to wash, the constant reminders that my work was invisible, it all pressed in, making me doubt myself. I realized that no matter what I did, no matter how much I sacrificed, my efforts were never enough. I was trapped in a system where my worth was conditional and my voice was irrelevant. And deep down, a quiet, simmering anger began to take root, one that I didn't fully understand yet, but I knew it would shape everything that came next. The breaking point hit when I was 22, just after finishing my last semester. I had been dealing with intense stress, working late nights, covering bills, and trying to save a little for my own future, when I got into a minor accident at work. My arm was bruised, and I was shaken, and all I wanted was a bit of support, a phone call, or even a check-in from my parents. Instead, I got a text from my mom: "Can't talk now, your sister's in trouble again. You'll understand." My chest tightened. They literally prioritized her over me, over my pain, over everything I had silently sacrificed for years. I felt a mix of disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. "You can't be serious," I muttered under my breath as I hobbled to the couch, arm throbbing. My dad's voice echoed down the hallway, calm, detached: "She needs us more. You're strong enough, you'll be fine." I stared at my phone, at the cold words on the screen, the flickering light of the screen reflecting the flicker of hope I'd held that my parents might see me for once. That hope was gone. In that instant, it was undeniable: my loyalty and sacrifices had never mattered, they had already made their choice. Sitting in my tiny apartment that night, the hum of the radiator filling the silence, I realized something shocking: my parents weren't going to change. They weren't going to acknowledge how unfairly I'd been treated, or how much I had given, or how much I had suffered. That choice, that single act of favoritism made official, carved a permanent line between us. A fire lit inside me, a mix of rage and clarity, and I understood, painfully but finally, that if I wanted to be valued, I couldn't count on them. The realization stung, but it also marked a turning point: I was no longer willing to be the one they could walk over. And yet, the next steps were terrifying. I had no idea how much further this betrayal would go. After that night, everything unraveled inside me. I felt hollow, exhausted, and completely invisible in the eyes of the people who were supposed to have my back. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, my arm throbbing from the accident, staring at the peeling paint on the wall, and thinking, why do I even bother? Every memory of my sacrifices flashed through my mind, covering her bills, taking extra shifts, consoling her after every meltdown, and none of it mattered. My parents hadn't just dismissed me once, they'd made it official. They had chosen her over me, over my struggles, over the very core of who I was. I tried talking to them afterward, cautiously, carefully, my voice tight with emotion. I've always tried to do my best, can't you see that I need you too? My dad sighed, brushing it off, you'll be fine. She's the one who needs attention right now. My mom shook her head, you're strong, we know you'll manage. That was it. No empathy, no acknowledgement, just the same dismissive, cold reinforcement that I was expendable, that my pain was secondary. The next few weeks were a blur. I felt isolated even in my own home, every corner of the apartment suffocating, every sound reminding me of her chaos and my parents' indifference. Sleep didn't come easily, the hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the floorboards felt oppressive, echoing my own helplessness. I realized in a gut-punching moment that I had nowhere to turn, that I couldn't rely on my family for support, for protection, or even for recognition of my suffering. The weight of that truth crushed me, leaving a pit in my stomach that I feared would never fill. And in the silence, with nothing but my own thoughts for company, I understood I had reached my rock bottom, and that the only way forward was to step away entirely. After months of feeling invisible and crushed, I made a choice that scared me more than anything else. I decided to walk away. Not in anger, not with shouting, just quietly, deliberately. I started by limiting my calls and texts, gradually creating distance between myself and the chaos of my family. I remember packing a small bag one weekend, leaving behind old notes, unfinished chores, and the weight of expectation that had been pressing on me for years. I can't keep living like this, I whispered to myself, gripping the straps of my backpack as if holding on to my courage. The house felt emptier than ever when I stepped out, but for the first time, it felt lighter too. I moved into a tiny apartment a few blocks away, furnished with the bare essentials and a growing sense of relief. The smell of fresh paint and the hum of the heater became comforting, grounding me in my own space. I could finally breathe without worrying about Emma's next tantrum or my parents' judgment. Friends noticed the change too. You look lighter, one said. I just smiled, knowing that the true shift was inside me. Even though I had distanced myself, the temptation to call them lingered, the guilt tugging at the edges of my resolve. But I reminded myself of the years of dismissal, the moments when I was invisible, the nights I cried alone while they prioritized her over me. I realized then that walking away wasn't giving up, it was protecting myself, valuing my own worth, and finally setting boundaries they refused to acknowledge. And yet, as I settled into my new life, I couldn't shake the unease of leaving the family I'd devoted myself to for so long. Something told me this was only the beginning of my journey, and the real test of my strength was still to come. Living on my own was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time, I had control over my environment, my bills, my schedule, my space, and it was mine to manage without anyone undermining me. I started picking up extra shifts, saving aggressively, and slowly furnishing my apartment with things that felt like me: a cozy armchair by the window, a desk for my laptop, books stacked in neat piles. The hum of the heater in the evening, the smell of coffee brewing, even the creak of the floorboards became comforting reminders that this space belonged entirely to me. For the first time, I could breathe without worrying about someone else's chaos spilling into my life. I also started reconnecting with friends I had drifted from over the years, those who had silently noticed the imbalance at home. It's good to see you thriving, one friend said, clinking our coffee mugs together. I laughed, a genuine, unguarded laugh, realizing how long it had been since I'd felt this kind of lightness. I immersed myself in work, my hobbies, and building routines that prioritized my mental and emotional health. It wasn't easy, some nights. I still felt the sting of rejection and betrayal, the echo of my parents' favoritism lingering like a shadow. But slowly, the anger began to transform into quiet satisfaction. Watching my sister struggle with the consequences of her actions from afar, while I built stability and pride in my own life, was oddly comforting. I realized I didn't need my family's validation anymore. The proof of my worth was in my independence, in my resilience, and in the life I was quietly creating without them. And yet, as I locked my apartment door each night, I knew the tension wasn't fully gone. There was still a reckoning waiting somewhere down the road, one I couldn't ignore forever. Even though I rarely contacted them, I couldn't help but notice the fallout from a distance. My parents continued to enable Emma, bending over backward to smooth over her messes while I watched from afar, free of their chaos. I heard through mutual friends about her latest financial blunders, her meltdowns, and the endless drama that had become the household norm. Every report, every snippet of gossip, gave me a strange sense of quiet satisfaction. I had chosen my own path, and they were still trapped in patterns I had escaped. I remember sitting at my small kitchen table, the evening sunlight casting long shadows across the room, sipping tea and feeling the contrast between their world and mine. My apartment smelled faintly of lavender and fresh bread I had baked myself, a sharp contrast to the tension that must have filled their house. I thought about the countless nights I had sacrificed sleep, comfort, and emotional stability to manage their crises, only to see my efforts ignored. Now, free from their judgment, I could finally thrive. At the same time, the observation brought a sobering clarity. They were predictable, stuck in their favoritism, and I was no longer a part of the system that fed their illusions. Each story of chaos reminded me why I had walked away and reinforced the boundaries I had set. And yet, beneath that satisfaction, there was a flicker of unease. I knew that eventually, my independence would force a confrontation, whether I wanted it or not. Something was brewing, a moment where the choices they had made would have to collide with the life I had carefully built. Years later, the inevitable moment came, but not in the way I expected. Emma had gotten herself into yet another mess, and my parents, predictably, called me for advice. I remember the phone ringing, my chest tightening, and a part of me wanting to hang up, but another part knew this was a test of everything I had built. "Can you help her out?" "She really needs guidance right now," my mom said, her voice clipped but anxious. I paused, feeling the weight of the past years pressing down on me. Calmly, I replied, "I can offer advice, but I'm not getting pulled back into her problems. I've moved on, and you need to deal with your choices." There was a stunned silence on the other end, a crack in their usual armor of authority. "But, we thought you'd," my dad started, but I interrupted gently, firmly. "I'm done being the fallback. I've built my life independently, and I'm not repeating the past." I could hear their frustration, their disbelief, but it didn't shake me. For the first time, I felt completely in control, untethered from the patterns that had trapped me for so long. I didn't need validation, I didn't need approval, and I didn't need to rescue anyone who had never valued me. After the call, I leaned against my doorframe, the evening light casting long shadows across my living room, and breathed deeply. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint scent of coffee brewing, it all felt like a confirmation of my life's new rhythm. I didn't shout, I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I simply asserted my boundaries and walked away again, knowing this was the ultimate payoff for years of betrayal and sacrifice. And yet, even in that quiet victory, a lingering tension reminded me that the echoes of my past were still close, and that my growth had not gone unnoticed. After that conversation, everything finally started to click into place. I began to see the patterns for what they were: years of favoritism, excuses, and emotional neglect that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with Emma. I remember sitting at my desk, the faint glow of my laptop illuminating my face, thinking about all the times I had bent over backward, the nights I cried alone, and the endless sacrifices that went unnoticed. It hit me: I had been carrying their dysfunction for decades, and it wasn't my job. I was never the problem, and I didn't need their approval to validate my worth. I felt a strange mix of relief and empowerment wash over me. The anger that had simmered quietly inside began to transform into clarity and focus. I realized that my parents' choices had never defined me, only I had the power to define my life. The memories of my sacrifices no longer carried the weight of resentment, they became evidence of my resilience, my discipline, and my capacity to thrive independently. Even the loneliness I had felt was reframed as a kind of freedom, a separation that allowed me to grow without interference. As I walked through my apartment, the soft hum of the heater and the smell of brewing coffee grounding me in the present, I understood something vital. I had finally reclaimed my narrative. The betrayal that had cut so deeply no longer held sway over my emotions. I wasn't bitter, I wasn't broken, and I wasn't lost. I was powerful in a quiet, unshakable way. And in that stillness, I knew the story wasn't just about walking away, it was about rising above, building a life worth living on my own terms, and never letting anyone diminish my worth again. Today, I've built a life entirely on my own terms. I wake up in a space that belongs to me, filled with light, quiet, and the little comforts I've chosen for myself. I can make decisions without guilt, pursue goals without interference, and enjoy moments without the looming tension of favoritism or judgment. I remember the nights I cried alone, the long hours I worked to cover problems that weren't mine, and the endless emotional labor I carried, and I feel a quiet, satisfying pride knowing I survived it all. Friends and mentors often tell me they admire my strength, but it's not about admiration anymore, it's about self-respect, about finally valuing myself enough to walk away from what didn't serve me. I never answer calls from my parents anymore, and I haven't for years. Their choices, their favoritism, their neglect, they no longer have power over my emotions. Emma continues to live in her chaos, my parents continue to enable her, and I observe it from a distance with neither bitterness nor expectation. I have everything I need, stability, freedom, and the knowledge that I am enough. Walking away wasn't easy, but it was necessary. It was the ultimate act of self-love and protection, a way to reclaim the years that were stolen by neglect and favoritism. As I sit by my window, the evening sun casting a golden glow across the room, I feel peace for the first time in my life. The past no longer haunts me, it informs me. And the life I've built is mine, untouched, unshakable, and fully my own. I don't resent them anymore, and I don't need them. I've finally closed the chapter, and this time, I know it will never reopen. The quiet victory, the empowerment, and the freedom I've earned are enough. I am finally free, and I will never look back.